I wanted to do something different with this book than I had done with past books, which was that every book I'd written prior to this book was kind of about a guy and a family at the moment where he is either completely screwing up his life or something else is happening to screw up his life. And so I wrote about these characters in their moment of crisis, sort of shredded their lives and gave them a chance to at least begin to see the beginnings of a redemption of some kind. I don't like to actually redeem characters because, I think redemption in life is fairly elusive. It's real, but it's elusive. And when you end a book with a lot of redemption, I just feel like, I don't know, nobody's buying that. So but I like to be hopeful. I like to end with a little bit of hope because I think, I'm generally a hopeful person, and I need to be. And so all my other books were kind of that journey for a character and a group of characters who are going through a very particular crisis at the moment of the crisis. And what I wanted to do with this book was something very different, possibly informed by things that were going on in my personal life, but I wanted to write a book about somebody after it was way too late. It's not in the moment, not in the moment that he was going through the crisis, but like after it was way too late for him to fix things, after redemption was really out of the question. And so I wanted to write a book about a guy for whom redemption was not even a possibility, for whom the crisis had already happened, and he had been in a Jonathan Tropper book 10 years ago and failed miserably. And now it's 10 years later, and what does this guy look like? And I think it was inspired by two things. It was inspired, like every book I think that anyone writes, it was inspired whether consciously or subconsciously by stuff that was going on in my life. And then it was inspired as well by a guy I saw in a pizza store. And I think we've all seen this guy, possibly not this exact guy, because that would be weird, but a guy like this. I was in a pizza store, which was kind of strange because I don't eat pizza, but I was in this pizza store, and this guy was sitting there, and he was wearing, if you can get the picture, he was probably about, let's say 100 pounds overweight. He shaved most of his face, I guess, and just missed parts, like maybe he didn't have a mirror, and he had his baggy blue jeans tucked into high-top sneakers like we did in high school back in the 80s, and some kind of souvenir jacket from something that didn't quite fit and that had stains on it. And he was sitting there with his MP3 player plugged into his ear, so listening to either music or NPR or something on his MP3 player, while he was reading the New York Post he had the paper sort of pinned down with one hand, and he was like shoveling pizza with the other. And I looked at this guy, and I thought, this is a guy who clearly doesn't have the benefit of anybody else weighing in on his life. This is a guy who's clearly alone. I didn't know if he was mentally ill or if he was just, lonely, but he was clearly alone in the world. And I was going through some stuff in my life where maybe some part of me was worried, like, I guess I was thinking, like, how many left turns do I have to make before I become that guy? And sort of the stunning truth that I arrived at is not very many. Like, it wouldn't take that many things, because by nature I'm sort of misanthropic anyway. It wouldn't take that many turns for me to be that fat, lonely, and at the time I was overweight. So, not 100 pounds overweight, but I was overweight. It wouldn't take that many left turns. So I wanted to write a book about that guy, maybe just to reassure myself that that guy wasn't going to be me. And so that's kind of, I guess in writing that book, I was trying to exercise those demons. I was trying to write about a guy who's, I was going through a divorce at the time, and this guy's been divorced for 10 years, and I guess my fears about what it would mean for me in 10 years. It was sort of an amalgam of all these things, but I wanted to write about the lonely people. But then what happened, which is what happens every time I start out with an idea, is that by the time I was 50 pages in, it became something completely different, and it became a story about this guy who is lonely and is, 10 years past the point where he could have fixed things, but I guess because I grew up in a large Jewish family, I was unable to fully isolate this guy Because, I mean, the thing about growing up in any large family, and certainly a large Jewish family, is even when you want to be isolated, you can't always be isolated. I mean, I grew up in Riverdale, New York, which is where my parents live. I live in New Rochelle. My brother lives in Scarsdale. I live on my sister's block. I mean, it's just, that's how it happens. So the book ended up getting populated by relatives and brothers and sisters, and you know, he was never truly one of the lonely people as I had intended for him to be, but it became a story about this guy. So for the 50% of people who've read the book already, I'm sorry that I'm about to bore you, but basically the book is about a guy named Silver who was very, very briefly, for about 5 minutes, he was a rock star. He had a band, and they had one hit, and that one hit lasted for one summer. He was basically Men Without Hats. I mean, and he nobody knows Men Without Hats. Anyway, so he was Dexy's Midnight Runners. So he had this one hit, and they thought they were going to just be famous forever, and then nothing ever happened again. And that sort of that moment of stardom kind of ruined his life and ruined his marriage, and he had just had this little baby daughter, and you know, he ended up getting divorced and moving into this building in the town. It's basically the only apartment complex in the neighborhood. So if you are a divorced person who wants to be in the same town, that's the only place for you to go. So it basically becomes a building full of divorced people. These buildings exist. I've seen them. I actually once tried to sell a television show about that building because I saw that building in LA and I thought, you know, this would be a great TV show, and nobody bought it, and so it ended up becoming the backdrop of this novel. But so he's living alone for the last bunch of years. He plays the drums in a wedding band now, and his daughter comes he has a 17-year-old daughter who's about to go off to college, and she comes to tell him that she is pregnant. And at the same time, he discovers that he has what's called an aortic dissection. Basically, his aorta has a tear in it that's causing the 3 walls of the aorta to swell with blood, and you usually don't find out about that. The way you find out about that is you die, and then they cut you open and they say, oh, you had an aortic dissection, but also called an aortic aneurysm and some other versions. But if once in a while something else happens, you start suffering from TIAs, which are mini strokes, you might get a savvy ER doctor who does a something, an MRI, whatever, and discovers that you have a tear, and then it can actually be repaired with fairly routine surgery. And Silver makes the decision at that point not to have the surgery. Even though he could die at any moment, he has a 17-year-old daughter who's pregnant, he has a family that has nothing to do with him. His cardiologist is actually about to marry his ex-wife, and he decides that, you know, his life may not be worth saving, and instead he's going to use whatever time he has left to try to repair his relationship with his daughter. And so I gave him a symptom, which is not necessarily based on medical science, that one of those mini strokes impairs his brain in such a way that he loses his inner monologue. And everything he thinks he's actually saying, but is not aware that he's sometimes saying it instead of thinking it, which gets him into a bit of trouble in the book. So what I want to do is I'll read you I think I've told you everything you need to know. I'm going to read a quick section just to kind of give you a sense of what's going on with him. The one other thing I should tell you is Silver's last name is Silver, but everyone calls him Silver, including his parents. And he's just not sort of worth a first name. And Silver's father is a rabbi. And I felt I owed the rabbinate something because in my last book, the rabbi was such a complete ass. So I wanted to create a character who happens to be a father and a rabbi and is actually the most respectable and sort of compassionate and well-thought person in the book, just in case there's a hell. So so Silver's dad is Rabbi Silver. And he gets this idea that he is going to take Silver with him to every life cycle event that he presides over. And the idea is that somehow in doing that, he's going to reaffirm Silver's will to live. If you're Jewish and you've been to these events, you know what a horrible idea that is. But that generates a nice amount of plot for the book. So anyway, so in this particular section that I'm going to read an abridged version of, his father brings him to a bris, which is a circumcision. The baby boy is carried in by his grandmother on a pillow. He is wearing an ornate white bedshirt and a tiny white skull cap affixed to his head with 2 white straps. The crowd gathered in the large, festively decorated living room comes to a hushed silence. For a moment there is no sound but the click and flash of the photographer shooting the infant relentlessly, as the grandmother, who is wearing so much makeup that she looks like a wax dummy, walks him into the center of the room. The women smile and cluck as the baby comes into view. His mother, looking frail and deflated in her maternity dress, smiles, but Silver can feel her ambivalence towards this ritual as if it's his own. Or maybe it is his own and he's just projecting. Baruch haba, the Mohel chants, blessed is the one who arrives, meaning the baby, who at this moment is anything but blessed. The infant is just getting over the trauma of his birth, flushed from the warmth of the womb on a harrowing claustrophobic journey through the birth canal, and then thrust mercilessly into the cold, harsh light of the world. And now, 8 days later, just as he's begun to develop a taste for breast milk and oxygen, and is thinking that he might be able to make a go of things here, a strange man is going to pull down his diaper and take a scalpel to his minuscule cock. That's not the funny part. But Silver has to clamp down on the overpowering urge to snatch him from his wax dummy grandmother, tuck him under his arm like a football, and run him to safety. The baby's mother, Susie, is on the fence. Silver is almost positive this sort of disturbance will be enough to make her reconsider the whole enterprise. She's in her late 20s, pretty and plump, and he's pretty sure, reading her expression, that this was not her idea. She converted to Judaism in order to marry Evan, which probably seemed like a good idea at the time, but now her son will pay the price. Evan stands at the head of the room between Reuben. Reuben is Silver's dad, Reuben Silver. He has a first name. Between Reuben and the Mohel in a designer suit and a large black yarmulke, creased and worn askew to demonstrate that he normally doesn't wear one. He watches as his son is carried in, feeling proud and not a little smug in this large, conspicuously expensive house that is a monument to both his wealth and his need for everyone to see it. He is circumcising his son for his father, who circumcised him for his father, who survived the concentration camps. Or else because Evan feels an innate subconscious need for his son's dick to resemble his own. And thus the ritual endures, even among lapsed Jews and their shiksa wives, thanks to a complex, self-perpetuating loop of guilt, narcissism, and daddy issues. The baby is passed to Evan's father, who sits down on the designated chair while the Mohel bends over him, muttering a slew of Hebrew blessings. Silver looks around the room at the gathered friends and relatives, all smiling and taking pictures, and the absurdity of the entire thing washes over him. A group of civilized upper-middle-class Americans getting together for some routine genital mutilation, followed by coffee and bagels. He's pretty sure he saw an omelet station out there on the patio as well. In his admittedly limited experience, he has come to identify 2 kinds of Mohels: those who believe they are carrying out a sacred rite, and those who couldn't get into medical school. The way this Mohel snaps on his latex gloves and unfurls his instrument roll with a flourish leads Silver to believe he is definitely in the latter category. He is in his early 40s, clean-shaven, and clearly enjoys this moment in the spotlight. He pulls out his scalpel, studies it for a moment, and then leans over the baby and reaches in. The room grows blurry, and Silver realizes that he's in danger of passing out. He leans back against the wall and closes his eyes. The first uncircumcised penis he ever saw belonged to James Nevins. He caught sight of it in the boys' locker room while they were changing for gym in the 4th grade. James had his shorts around his ankles, was trying to step into them without removing his sneakers, a task that left him exposed for a good 30 seconds or so. James's thin, flapping member waved back and forth like the pendulum of a metronome, and it looked to Silver like someone had chopped off his tip. He immediately pictured a variety of horrifying, if far-fetched, household accidents, and more vitally wondered how the boy urinated. "What's the matter, you never seen a dick before?" James snapped at him, and he realized he was staring. "What happened to it?" he blurted out. "Nothing happened to it, shithead," Jimmy said. He doesn't remember what he said after that, but it led to his getting punched in the face for the first time. 2 firsts in the span of 1 minute. That was a big day. Even now he can taste the blood on his tongue, and he opens his eyes just as the baby starts to wail. The Mohel, having made his cut, shouts out a blessing in Hebrew. The father reads one too, his tongue tripping over the Hebrew consonants he hasn't practiced since he was a little boy. Someone produces a silver wine goblet. The mohel dips the baby's pacifier into the wine and then shoves it into the baby's mouth. If you're going to get the baby plastered, why not do it before you cut him, Silver thinks. None of this makes any sense. Silver flees down the hall and through the den and then descends some stairs into a second sunken den that they probably call a sunroom, and then out the sliding glass doors and across the patio where the catering staff are laying out platters and pouring mimosas. I am not cut out for this, he thinks. And the cute skinny bartender with the nose stud and the big green eyes looks up and says, "You and me both," which is how he knows he's spoken out loud. The heat out here is surprising, the sun radiating off the bluestones, cooking the air at eye level. After the blasting central air inside, it's a welcome respite, like stepping into a different season. "They wrapping up in there?" the girl says, working the white plastic cork out of a champagne bottle. Her dark hair is short and uneven, like she cuts it herself, but she's pulling it off. Yeah, he can feel himself staring too closely at her. This is the amazing thing about the male brain, or at least his male brain, which is admittedly compromised by strokes and an unrelenting lust that has been nesting there since early adolescence. He can be dying, can be taking in a sacred ceremony that is both deeply moving and somewhat horrifying, can be falling in love with his ex-wife all over again, and, at the same time, still have the computing power to consider this hot little bartender, to note the monochromatic tendril of a tattoo creeping around the side of her neck, the way her tongue flicks up to lick her upper lip, to hear the cigarettes in her laid-back punk rock voice, and to contemplate how this would all manifest itself in her lovemaking. She looks at him and smiles, amused and unthreatened, and he wants to kiss those laid-back lips, wants to run away with her and from her all at the same time. "You played in that band, right? The Broken Daisies." "The Bent Daisies," he says. She accepts the correction. "Cool." He watches her patiently work the cork, twisting and pulling until it comes off with a soft pop. She puts the bottle down and starts on another. "You okay there?" she says. "I'm dying." She considers the information casually. She is cute and a bartender, a combination that renders her largely unfazed by default. "I just needed some air," he says. "Well," she says, looking around the vast yard complete with an impressive free-form pool and a goldfish pond, "you came to the right place." Later, the guests mill about the patio, enjoying a late morning brunch and casting the odd look his way. He is sitting by the pool with his pants rolled up and his legs in the water, drinking champagne out of the bottle. His father makes his way across the yard and sits down beside him. "What happened in there?" he says. "I don't know, I got a little claustrophobic." Reuben nods. "How's the water?" "It's nice," Silver says, "warm." "Listen," Reuben says, "your mother is beside herself." "I'm sorry." "Come for Friday night dinner. Let her cook for you. Let her see you. It will be good for both of you." "Okay." His father looks at him, kind of measures him with his eyes. There are things Reuben wants to tell him, questions he wants to ask, but he can see that Silver's not up for it right now. Instead, Reuben pulls off his loafers and then his black socks, pulling up his suit pants, and puts his legs in next to Silver's. "It's getting so I can't take you anywhere," he says. Thank you. It's that. So, how autobiographical, how far am I from the main character of the Book of Joe? I think at the time I wrote it, I was none of these characters, plot-wise actually reflect me. It's just, I think anytime you write any character, you're infusing it with stuff from your life. Nothing that happened to that guy happened to me. After the book came out, I've learned since then that because that's a book, the Book of Joe is about a guy who writes a book about his hometown, and then he's forced to go back home, and everyone in his town is mad at him about the book he's written. And I do find, once my books, started selling and people began reading them, that everyone who knows me thinks they know who my books are about, and they always assume, it's either about them or about someone we both knew, and that woman is that woman we grew up with, and that's this. And I've heard from a lot of people who are sure they know exactly who these characters are, which is almost insulting when your job is to write fiction, because you're basically being told you don't make anything up, you just grab people from your life. And I think what it comes down to is people greatly overestimate how interesting they are. And I just don't know many people in my life that would make it into one of my books, including me. So it's just, you keep things from everything you experience, but nothing that happens to that character. Because we go back to his high school years, which is 1986 in that book, which is when I was finishing high school. In 1986, I was a junior in high school, which is as far as I got. There's some flashback stuff there that very much comes from my life, but what the character's going through is just nothing to do with me. The question is, do I enjoy the process of writing these books, or do I find it, existentially painful? It's actually, I very much like everything that leads up to the writing and everything that comes after I've written. The actual process of writing, there are days when it's really enjoyable because I'm actually enjoying what I'm writing, and then there are a lot of days where I know everything I wrote is going to end up in the garbage because none of it was good. It's like everything else you do. If you have a day where you feel you really nailed it, then that was a good day. It's never fun. The only time it's fun is, if I happen to be in a place where I see people in suits going to offices, then it's a lot of fun. And I thank God every day I'm not doing that, but the actual process is sometimes painful and sometimes, very exciting. Do I have a favorite of the books I've written? I have an absolute not favorite, a book that I don't recommend at all. I get yelled at every time I say it by somebody. My first book, I think, is awful. It's called Plan B, and if you haven't read it, don't. In terms of favorites, you have favorites for different reasons. This Is Where I Leave You's been paying my mortgage for the last few years, so that's my favorite. But the one that's most personal to me is a book called Everything Changes, which came out in 2005, and Everything Changes is like, it's my favorite because it's a small book, and it came the most out of something directly impacting my life at the time, so it felt very personal to me. And also, it was published really poorly. The publisher put the worst cover maybe in the history of publishing on the book, which is not out there anymore, thankfully. If you see the book now, it's not there. But the cover that it was published under was a bright yellow cover with, it said Everything Changes in the New Yorker font, which is completely wrong for my books. And then the image was the shape of a naked woman's body. And then, for reasons I still to this day don't understand, there was a little comic-y man with a red umbrella walking a tightrope across her vagina. And they loved, and I saw that was the cover. And if you've read the book, nothing to do with anything in the book. And when I saw that cover, I was horrified, and I called up my publisher and I said, whatever you do, you can't publish this book with this cover. First of all, it looks upmarket, nobody's going to buy it, and second of all, it's just an awful cover. And they said to me, as they've said before, don't you think we know what we're doing? And the book came out and died on arrival. And I think largely that cover had something to do with it. The only thing that saved the book was that year Target started selecting books for it created an in-house book club in the Target stores, and someone picked that book, and so 40,000 books went off to Target, and that saved the book from being a real loss. But the book really died on arrival, and it prompted me when I had, before I had seen that cover art, I had signed another 2-book deal with that publisher. And when I wrote the next book for them, I called like a high-level meeting of everybody, and I didn't sell the kind of quantities where you have that kind of significant pull at a publisher yet. And I just gave a whole big speech about how this book I wrote is so much better than the last one, and you guys can't kill it with a cover like that again, and please. And I came in with like a whole presentation of great covers and why I think they're great covers, and then they put a crappy cover on that book too, and they also retitled the book something awful, and I owed them one more book, and that prompted me to actually borrow money to buy my contract back so I could go somewhere else because I didn't want to let them publish any more of my books. That wasn't the question, though. The question was, which is my favorite, and it's probably Everything Changes, first of all, because like I said, it came from a really autobiographical place for me. There's stuff in that book, and I'll never tell what, that really came out of my life. Secondly, it did so poorly that I felt, it was like The Runt. And then, after This Is Where I Leave You hit the bestseller list, and since then, that book continues to sell really well now, and I'm really happy that people have found that book now, and also that because This Is Where I Leave You sold so well, my former publisher hired that artist to do covers for all my backlist, which now all have matching fonts and art as This Is Where I Leave You, so all those covers have gotten off the shelves, which I'm really happy about. So yeah, that's my favorite one if I had to pick. The question he's asking is, he's taking issue with the fact that I said Silver is beyond redemption because he feels, having read the book, that Silver redeems himself. And I guess to clarify, what I meant was that he can't possibly fix the damage he did. He might be able to turn a corner now, but the damage, the fact that he had nothing to do with his daughter from the time she was 10 till she was 17, the fact that he walked out on his family and that he's lost them pretty much forever, like that, he can't fix that. All he could do is try to move forward differently, but it's just, I wanted somebody whose situation was no longer fixable. She's asking, if I start to care about these characters, how can I then do these terrible things to them? Well, because better them than me. It's a form of wish fulfillment. You're kind of writing. Okay, we're gonna go a little bit deeper here. When you grow up, as I grew up, as probably a number of people in this room grow up in a very sheltered, insulated, privileged life. Middle class, upper middle class. There's a general philosophy of not rocking the boat too much. And sometimes you don't have reason to rock the boat, and sometimes you're unable to rock the boat because you're born into such a secure environment that you find yourself following the script. And I think a lot of my characters are people who've grown up that way and suddenly realize they followed the script a little too far. I guess to some extent when I was growing up in that environment, there were things that I wanted to change or break out of that I had trouble doing, and maybe took me longer to do than I would have liked. And so there's an element of wish fulfillment in, if you put people into an extreme situation, into some kind of pressure cooker, they get to behave in ways that they otherwise might not get to behave, and ultimately it's that extreme behavior that leads you to freedom. And because I guess I feel in polite society and in upper middle class society, it's very hard to behave that way, and therefore it's very hard to take those stances and get to the freedom you need to get to. With these characters, giving them those horrible events, give them a chance to act out in a way that in real life we so rarely get to do. So there's an element of wish fulfillment to that. I remember at various points in my life, and make of this what you will, I remember getting on airplanes once or twice, and this was way before 9/11, obviously, but I remember getting on airplanes at various points in my life and kind of hoping somebody hijacked the plane, and just like I needed to change my life and I wasn't capable of it, so I was hopeful that something else might happen that would, give me the ability or the courage or the nerve to do it or to change the stakes. So I guess doing things to my characters is all about changing the stakes for them. So yeah. The question was in terms of the wit or the humor in the book, do I have certain comic role models? I always enjoyed writers. I'm not a fan of dense literary prose. There are books I've loved that are written that way, but for the most part, I still think when you're writing fiction, at least when I'm writing fiction, I'm not setting out to write, quote unquote, important fiction. I'm trying to write fiction that is, that to me is reflective and at the same time entertaining. And I don't think you can entertain people or ask people to stick with these characters if you're not also entertaining them to some extent. So, when you're writing a thriller, there's that form of entertainment, that's suspense. I tend not to write thrillers, so I tend to write, and for me the entertaining part is, and I don't even mean for it to be that funny, it's more just to get to the truth about human nature, which is kind of funny when you tell it honestly. If you actually share your thoughts, if I were to tell you what I'm thinking right now, if we all did that, it would be a very different world. I'm not saying it would be a better world, but so when I can write something and I can tell a truth that all of us might be uncomfortable, I might never admit that I've had a thought out loud that I admit a character has had. And when a character has it, everyone reads it and goes, oh, I've had that thought. But we don't necessarily share that except to maybe our closest friends. So, and that turns out to be funny because it's sometimes funny just hearing the truth in a way expressed simply, because we really don't express truth simply, when it comes to the less noble or selfless thoughts that we have. I mean, because there's a part of us all that's a selfish bastard, and and when you can put that down on paper and give it to a character and let a character own it in just the way we tend not to own it in real life, it's just funny. I don't know. The question is, have I ever considered writing a female protagonist and from a female point of view? I've never considered writing a close female point of view protagonist for the same reason I've never set a book in Istanbul, which is because I think a certain level of authenticity might disappear. At the same time, I can stand before any crowd, a crowd like this, a crowd 10 times the size of this, a crowd of 3 people, and I can defend every damn thought my character has. I don't know that I could stand here with the same confidence if I wrote a female protagonist who was having these kind of thoughts. At the same time, I am trying, as I move more forward, as I'm writing more books and trying not to write the same book over and over again, which is something I started to worry about. I've moved away from first-person narratives. I moved into third-person narratives that give me a chance to switch point of view, so I can write. And one last thing before I go, I have chapters in his daughter's point of view. I have chapters in his ex-wife's point of view, and to me, what I'm trying to get to is a place where I could give equal weight to different characters, male, female, straight, gay, etc. But that took some growing as a writer, and the safe thing, not just the safe thing, but the honest thing for me is to be able to write to a large extent of things I'm quite certain of. So, what writers do I like to read? I tend to read a lot of debut fiction just because it gets sent to me in galley form. The blurb game is a big game, so I get 3 books a week in my house, and occasionally when I need a book, I grab one of those. My favorite authors ever, growing up, when I was in high school, I read pretty much exclusively Kurt Vonnegut and Stephen King. And then as I got older, I started branching out a little bit, and in college, I read Bright Lights, Big City by Jay McInerney, and that kind of sent me off in a whole other direction, looking for contemporary lit fiction. And probably my favorite living author is Richard Russo. And I read everything he writes. And I would like to think that 10 years from now, I'm writing those kind of books. It's maybe, but those are the writers I've kind of liked. I was actually just thinking, this is the first crowd that didn't ask about the movies, immediately. It's a diversification of brain power. Writing a script uses different muscles than writing a book. They actually, in my opinion, when you can do both, I'm lucky enough to be able to get paid to do both, they kind of, you can improve each with the other. Screenwriting, whether it's for TV or film, has to be extremely economical. Pages equal time equals, production. So you learn how to say the same thing in a much shorter conversation. You learn how to really just put the essentials down to communicate something. And then yet, because I write, and that translates over into novels, because sometimes in novels, because you don't have those constraints, you tend to oversay things and overwrite things, and you start looking at it more critically and more economically. On the other side, novels make you care a tremendous amount about language. And so when I'm writing scripts, I find I care a tremendous amount about exactly what people are saying, how they're saying it, how I'm describing something. So I think they kind of enhance each other, and for me, it's great to be able to do both because you're just using different muscles. I can write a novel all morning, take a lunch break, and then write a script all afternoon and not feel like I've been doing the same thing all day. And at the same time, it's on the producing side, that's when you have to learn to sort of, it's a different thing when you learn that in book writing, what you write becomes the finished product. And in movie making and in TV, what you write becomes the beginning of the finished product, and then you're going to have to make decisions, or sometimes have other people make decisions that have to do with budget and casting and marketing and all sorts of other things, and you have to look at what you do as simply an integral piece of it, but not the whole thing. Her question was that she used to work in film and she was not aware very often or ever of authors getting to adapt their own work for a studio film. It didn't start out with them offering me. It started out with me selling myself. And what I had to do first was actually, I wrote the first screenplay I got paid to write, which was after I wrote a spec, was not based on one of my books. I had to write a script to just sort of prove to people in the industry that I'm actually a legitimate screenwriter who isn't going to take his book, change the format into script form and say here. But that I wasn't going to be precious about the writing or the characters, and I was going to do what I had to do. And once I sort of showed them, what a whore I was, then it became a lot easier to get those jobs. But what happened was when I reached a point after I'd written one or two scripts that sort of sold in big deals and made a big deal, I started attaching myself. If you were going to option the book, I was attached as the screenwriter, and that just became part of the deal, which I may not continue to do because I'm actually finding it more fun to not adapt my books. So, but in terms of the process, do I play a role in the process? I've been really lucky that so far, This Is Where I Leave You, which we finished shooting a few months ago, the director was extremely collaborative with me. He's somebody that I had written other scripts for, and we'd become very friendly. So he kept me in the process the whole way through. I was on set for most of it. I was involved in casting. I was involved in all, production decisions that affected script. I don't know that it will always be like that. One of the reasons I went into TV is because in TV, the directors work for the writers. In film, the director, you have to kind of hand it over at some point and hope he's feeling collaborative. So that's it. The plan was to be a rock star. I pursued that kind of seriously for a while and discovered I sucked at writing music. I could play it really well. I could play other people's music quite well. I was a piano player, and I did the whole Billy Joel cover band thing, and I did all that stuff. But when it came to trying to make it, first of all, piano-driven rock was not, there was Billy Joel, there was Elton John, and that was it, And I didn't really want to write that kind of music. I loved playing it, if I was good, I would have pursued that, but I just wasn't good enough, and so this was the fallback position. How much do I know of the story when I first sit down to write? I know the rough idea of what I want to take a character through or a series of characters through. So I know the beginning and I know the end. Everything in the middle, I write the first 50 pages, then I sit down and start figuring out, okay, I've lifted these 8 balls in the air, which are going to stay, which have to go, how am I going to move these forward, and then I start plotting everything. And I generally replot that. The middle 250 to 300 pages are what I'm constantly reworking and re-outlining and figuring out, but I always know kind of where it's going to start and where it's going to end. The question is, how does Jewish stuff play out in mass market? I could give a whole lecture on what I've been through just on that. The start is, for 4 books, I refused to write about anything Jewish. And I did that for 2 reasons. The first reason was I didn't want people to get angry at me because my thoughts on God and Judaism don't necessarily fall in line with Jewish people's thoughts about God and Judaism. So I avoided it for that reason. And the second reason I avoided it was I had this idea in my head that if I wrote a successful book about something Jewish, I would get pigeonholed as a Jewish author, and that would kind of thwart my growth as an American novelist. And I kept that thought process for 4 novels. When I started to write my 5th novel, which was This Is Where I Leave You, for those who haven't read This Is Where I Leave You, This Is Where I Leave You is a novel about 4 adult siblings whose father dies and leaves behind this request for them to go back to their childhood home and sit Shiva for him. And they've never really identified themselves as Jews, and it's a strange request, but these 4 adult siblings with all their baggage and their crap and their dislike for each other have to go spend a week in their childhood home. And when I started writing that book, the Shiva, it was never going to be about that. The book was basically going to be about a man, which is how the book starts. A man comes home and finds his wife in bed with his boss. That sounds like a joke, but it's and what I wanted to do, my thought was this exactly. If you are a man who lives in the suburbs, okay, if you walk in on your wife's, first of all, if you walk in on your wife sleeping with your boss, in that moment, you lose your wife, your job, and your house. right? It might take a little while for all that to happen. But if you live in the suburbs and you don't have a wife, a job, or a house, do you actually exist? And that was the question I wanted to tackle, the large existential question I wanted to deal with in that book. But what happened was I started writing the book. I wrote the beginning where he walks in. That went great. And if you've read it, like, I wrote that entire chapter in one sitting on a BlackBerry on an airplane. And the whole thing came out, and I never changed a word of it. It worked fine. Then the book got steadily duller. And I was about 100 pages in and not feeling really strongly about the book, and I needed a further humiliation for my character. And I'm like, okay, the guy just walked in on his wife having really raunchy sex with his boss, right? What else can I do? And so the answer was send him home to his parents. So I said it, it was his dad's 70th birthday party, and he goes home to his family home to celebrate his dad's 70th birthday, and he hasn't told anybody that his marriage is over. He hasn't told anybody anything, and he has to go home and deal with these siblings. And when I wrote that chapter, it was the first time in the entire book that I said, oh, this could be a good book. So then I had to think of, well, how do I give the book to this family? Because if I was this guy, you couldn't get me to stay in that house for more than 20 minutes. And that's when at some point the idea of a shiva came to me. But I grappled with it for months, and I would call my agent with all these angsty phone calls because I didn't want to write a book about Jewish things. But it just seemed like the perfect construct to keep him home with these siblings, and I knew I had to write about the siblings. And so I ended up doing it with great trepidation, and that book turned out to be by far the biggest bestseller I'd ever written. And so the joke of it was, like, I tried like hell to not get pigeonholed for 4 books, and those books didn't really sell that well. Book of Joe sold well, but nothing else really sold well. And then I wrote about a bunch of Jews, and the thing just exploded. And so if you're wondering why there's a rabbi, and one last thing before I go. But anyway, so how it plays, the feedback I've gotten from the books is that family is family. And I hear as much from Catholics and Italians and every kind of family can relate to that kind of family dynamic of adult siblings and their childhood gripes. So, in the end, the answer, I guess, is I'm not really writing about something Jewish. I'm writing about something that's universal. I'm just dropping it into a Jewish world because I can write about that world really well. How it plays, we'll see. The movie comes out next September. We'll see how it plays. The joke, of course, is there's almost no Jews in the cast. Like, if Warner Brother could have cast, like, Dolph Lundgren in every role. Nobody here knows who Dolph Lundgren is. I'm sorry, that was a really arcane reference. If they could have cast, like, the master race in every, like, anything to, a bunch of Jews sitting around in Warner Brothers trying to figure out how we could get less Judaism into the movie. And like literally, like, the suggestions were there's a really nice scene at one point in the movie where Jane Fonda is singing along with the cantor in the synagogue, and we taught Jane Fonda, we hired this cantor, we got this nice scene of Jane Fonda singing along, and the studio was like, can we get that out of there? We don't want to, do we have to have the Hinei Matov? Do we have, the studio's scared of it to a point. What's funny is I'm doing one last thing before I go with Paramount, and they're taking the opposite approach. Because when, first of all, JJ's Jewish, J.J. Abrams, who optioned it, is Jewish, and I'm Jewish, but the studio execs there are not Jewish, and they're like, keep it all, and it's just a different state of mind. But yeah, we'll see. I think it does. Whether you watch a show, whether you watch a movie about an Indian family or a Jewish family or a Catholic family, as long as you make the characters real, my hope is, it's going to play. We'll find out.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, Please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.